They never wanted you to hear this. Not in school, not in church, not in any polished history book, because once you hear it, you can't unhear it. It isn't just a story about a farm in Missouri or a man burned alive in his own barn. No, this is the fracture line of America itself. The truth that power tried to bury beneath ashes, whispers, and courtroom lies. On a cold night in 1855, a girl named Celia, only 19 years old, set fire to the very structure that had caged her, consumed her body, and tried to erase her soul. And in those flames, her master's body dissolved into smoke. They called it murder, but it was never murder. It was resistance. It was the collision between absolute control and a single human being who decided she would no longer be a slave to another man's night. Understand this. Celia's name survives not because she lived, but because the system destroyed her. A legal machine designed by men who believed property could not speak, property could not fight back, property could not feel. The same machine that told you in subtle ways, every single day of your life, obey, accept, do not resist. You were born into its shadows, and the story of Celia is not just the story of slavery. It is the mirror they don't want you to hold up to your own world. Because if you see clearly, if you notice the strings that guide your thoughts, your obedience, your silence, then you're no longer controllable. And there is nothing more dangerous than a man who sees. So I'm going to take you down into this forbidden history. 13 revelations, each one sharper, darker, more dangerous than the last. Each one a strike against the illusions you were trained to worship. But be warned, once we begin, there's no turning back. Because when Celia's barn burned, it didn't just consume her master's flesh. It lit a signal fire. A fire still burning, hidden in plain sight, waiting for the ones willing to see. Power doesn't survive through whips alone. It survives through silence, through systems, through carefully engineered obedience. Celia's life proves this. From the moment she was purchased, she was not seen as a human. She was a ledger entry, a possession, an object in the same category as cattle, corn, or land. That's the surface of slavery. But underneath, it was a psychological system designed to erase the idea of resistance before it could even form. Think about it. The law said she was property. That means if she was beaten, it was not abuse. If she was violated, it was not rape. If she screamed, it was not testimony. In the eyes of Missouri law, she had no voice, no will, no soul the state was bound to recognize. What kind of system invents laws to strip away a person's humanity? The kind of system that understands the mind is more valuable to control than the body. This is why her master kept records. Pages filled with punishments, infractions, threats. It wasn't just discipline. It was programming. A ledger designed to remind the enslaved every day that they were observed, tracked, and judged. This is the architecture of control. Constant surveillance, constant fear, the knowledge that one wrong move could destroy not only you but everyone you loved. Sound familiar? Look closer at your own world. Surveillance cameras on every corner. Algorithms cataloging your every search, your every word, your every private desire. A ledger of digital ink holding you in invisible chains. You tell yourself you're free because you don't see the whip. But freedom is never about the absence of chains. It's about the absence of fear. And fear. Fear is what binds modern men tighter than iron shackles ever could. Celia lived under this architecture of fear for 5 years. 5 years of being called at night into a house that pretended to be Christian, moral, respectable. 5 years of a man who believed the law was his shield, the church was his cover, and that no one would ever dare to expose the truth of what he did in the dark. But history is cruel to tyrants. The things they build to make themselves untouchable eventually become the very noose that tightens around their legacy. Celia understood something dangerous. Silence is the weapon of the oppressor. And one night, she decided to break it. Celia's nightmare wasn't sustained by one man alone. It was protected, sanctified, by institutions that wore the mask of virtue. This is the paradox of power. Evil rarely shows its face. It hides beneath robes, pulpits, and polished words. Her master, Robert Newsom, was a church-going man, a man who donated to missions, who bowed his head in prayer on Sunday mornings, who was called respected by neighbors who pretended not to notice the truth. The same congregation that praised his faith never once asked why a teenage girl, purchased at 14, bore children with his features. Their silence was not ignorance, it was complicity. The church became his shield, the law became his sword. Missouri statutes declared that an enslaved woman could not accuse a white man of rape, not because rape didn't exist, but because the system itself declared it legally impossible. Imagine the arrogance of such an institution. To write words on paper that erase suffering, to legislate away truth, to declare by decree that a woman's body was an object without the right to refuse. And here's the revelation they don't want you to see. This wasn't just Missouri. This wasn't just slavery. This is the blueprint of institutional corruption across time. Governments, religions, corporations, they do not need to destroy truth. They simply redefine it. They write the rules so the crime becomes invisible. They sanctify abuse by calling it order. They disguise exploitation as tradition. Look at the patterns. The priest who preaches purity while hiding his sins. The politician who swears oaths to justice while selling favors to the powerful. The corporation that speaks of progress while feeding off your labor and your time. Institutions don't protect you, they protect themselves. They survive by telling you that obedience is righteousness, that silence is morality, that submission is strength. But Celia's story rips the mask away. When she struck her master down and fed his remains to fire, she wasn't just destroying a man. She was exposing the system that allowed him to exist. A system that declared itself holy, legal, untouchable. And in that act, she revealed the truth every man needs to face. Institutions will never save you. They will sacrifice you without hesitation to preserve their image. This is why forbidden history matters. It's not about the past. It's about right now. Because if they could erase Celia's humanity with words in a law book, what makes you think they aren't doing the same thing to you? Just with new words, new tools, new chains. Slavery doesn't end when the chains are broken. It mutates. It adapts. It takes new shapes so that the system survives while convincing you it's gone. Celia's story proves this, because what kept her captive was not just iron, but the slow erosion of will. Think of the design. Every day she worked under the eye of a man who kept records of her behavior, a ledger of obedience. Every night she was summoned, knowing no one would intervene, because the law itself had declared her resistance illegal. That is not just physical imprisonment. That is psychological warfare. When your own mind begins to believe there is no escape, the chains are complete. Now ask yourself, where do you see that same warfare today? It's not whips, it's algorithms, it's advertising. It's a school system that tells you what to memorize but never how to question. It's a government that floods you with distractions, bread and circus, so you never notice the bars around your cage. You think you're free because you can choose between brands, between parties, between screens. But choice is not freedom when every option is designed by the same hand. Celia lived in a world where the law itself told her she could not say no. You live in a world where the system tells you resistance is pointless, that your vote is swallowed by machines, that your outrage is buried under endless headlines, that your energy is spent chasing shadows while the true powers remain untouched. The plantation became digital, the ledger became data, and you are still being written into the book of obedience. But here's what terrifies them. Systems of control are never perfect. There's always one person who refuses, one person who sees through the lies, who refuses to bend their neck. Celia became that person, and when she acted, She shattered the programming. She proved that even within a world designed to erase resistance, one act of defiance can burn through the illusion. And here's the truth they never teach you. You are being conditioned in the same way. Conditioned to wake up, obey, consume, sleep. Conditioned to live like a cog, never like a man. The question is not whether you are chained. The question is whether you will notice, and whether you will strike when the time comes. Celia noticed. And in that noticing, she became dangerous.
When the barn smouldered down to ash, Robert Newsom's neighbours didn't ask why. They didn't ask what might drive a 19-year-old girl to such desperation. They asked only one thing: how to protect the system. That's the role of courts, then and now. Not to reveal truth, but to contain it. Not to serve justice, but to ensure obedience survives the shock. Celia was arrested almost instantly, and from that moment, the trial was never about her. It was about preserving the illusion that power was still sacred. In the courthouse, men sat in black coats, quoting law books, pretending to weigh evidence. But the verdict was already written before she entered the room. The law of Missouri declared her property, and property cannot defend itself against its owner. Do you see the trick? The law did not argue whether she had been raped. It did not argue whether she had been violated for 5 years. The law argued whether property could ever say no. And in that moment, the mask of civilization slipped. A courtroom filled with scripture, morality, and solemn rituals was nothing more than a stage play designed to disguise brute force. Witnesses testified. Neighbors admitted what they'd suspected for years. The evidence of assault was undeniable. But the judge silenced every attempt to raise the word rape. Why? Because if the court admitted that possibility, the entire system of slavery cracked open. If Celia could resist, then every enslaved woman could resist. If she had the right to fight back, the entire edifice of ownership collapsed. This is why forbidden history matters. Courts are not neutral. They are instruments. They exist to define what is legal, not what is true. And the line between legal and illegal is written by the same hand that profits from obedience. You see it even now. Banks laundering billions while a poor man rots for stealing bread. Politicians see it, belling nations, while protesters are caged for raising their voices. Different time, same theatre. Celia sat in that courtroom, 19 years old, already a mother twice over from her master's assaults, and she told them the truth. I could not bear it anymore. Her words trembled the walls. But trembling is not collapse. And so the court silenced her, buried her testimony, and prepared the rope that would hang her. Because in the eyes of power, her crime was not killing a man. Her crime was proving that resistance was possible. Celia's words should have changed everything. They should have ripped the veil from the court, exposed the brutality everyone already knew but pretended not to see. Instead, they erased her. The transcripts we have today are incomplete, sections vanished, entire testimonies lost, key records mysteriously missing from the Missouri archives. You think that's an accident? No. It's the same game played for centuries. Bury the truth so the illusion survives. Understand this: every system of power has two faces. The one it shows the public, polished, righteous, dignified, and the one it hides, cruel, manipulative, blood-soaked. Celia's trial forced those two faces together. If they admitted her humanity, the mask shattered. So instead, they chose erasure. They chose silence. They chose to rewrite reality with ink and rope. And here's the dangerous truth. They never want you to realize. Suppression is not about destroying information. It's about controlling memory. They don't need to burn every book. They just need to make sure the right stories are never told. They don't need to censor every voice. They just need to make sure you hear the approved ones loud enough to drown out the rest. That's how history is engineered. Not lost, but sculpted. Ask yourself,
What truths are being sculpted out of your own lifetime? Wars fought for profit disguised as peacekeeping. Surveillance states disguised as protection. Entire populations conditioned to think obedience is safety, submission is patriotism, slavery is freedom. You are fed narratives so polished that you mistake them for truth. And just like Celia, if you resist those narratives, you will be branded a criminal, a radical, a danger. That's why you're here, listening now. Because some part of you already knows the official version of reality is a lie, and once you sense it, you can never go back to sleep. So, here's what I want you to do. To prove to yourself, and to prove to me, that you are not asleep, I want you to comment this phrase twice below. The fire still burns. Type it twice. Once for Celia and once for yourself. That is the signal. That is the lock. You're not just watching anymore. You're stepping into the current of dangerous knowledge. And once you step in, you are marked, different, awake. Because just like the fire that consumed her master's body, this knowledge is not just history. It is a living flame. And now, it burns inside you. What happened to Celia is not trapped in 1855. It is not a relic. It is a blueprint. The same forces that silenced her, erased her, and buried her story are the same forces that shape the world you live in right now. Power does not change its nature. It only changes its tools. Think about it. In Celia's time, the ledger was ink and paper, cataloguing the smallest infraction. Today, it's data. Every keystroke, every search, every purchase logged into invisible archives you'll never see. The plantation walls have become invisible, but you still live inside them. You still wake, work, consume, obey, and sleep, according to schedules you did not choose. That is not freedom. That is programming. The court that hanged Celia told itself it was protecting order. But what was that order? It was the preservation of hierarchy. White above black, master above slave, male above female, law above truth. Today's hierarchies look different on the surface, but the bones are the same. The wealthy above the poor, corporations above citizens, governments above conscience, systems above the individual. And just like in Celia's trial, anyone who resists is branded the enemy. They will call you a conspiracy theorist. They will call you unstable, dangerous, misguided. Labels are their shackles, words forged to bind your spirit so you never dare to rise. Do you see the game yet? The system doesn't just punish rebellion. It conditions you to believe rebellion is madness. That's how obedience sustains itself. Not through force, through belief, through the illusion that there is no alternative. Celia shattered that illusion the moment she fought back. She proved that the most dangerous act a human can commit is not murder, not violence, not even escape. The most dangerous act is to say, I will no longer believe in your rules, because once you stop believing in their script, the stage collapse.
Says, the court becomes theatre. The master becomes a man of flesh and weakness. The law becomes a lie scribbled on parchment. And suddenly, you see, this is why her story was buried. This is why you were never taught her name in school, because her fire was not just literal, it was symbolic. It was the spark that could spread through time and ignite others. Men like you, men listening right now. The question is, will you carry that fire forward, or let it die in ash? Celia's trial was a lesson, not just for her, but for everyone who lived under that system. The message was clear. If you resist, you will be destroyed. That's how power maintains itself. Not only by punishing the body, but by sending a warning into the minds of the living. Fear ripples through the community like smoke through a barn, and everyone breathes it in. But here's the truth. They are still doing this today. Only the methods have changed. No ropes, no courthouses filled with candles and wooden benches. Instead, screens, headlines, narratives repeated until they become scripture. Today's public executions are reputational. If you step out of line, if you question too loudly,
They will not hang you from a rope. They will hang you from words. They will strip your credibility, laugh at your rebellion, drown your fire in mockery until others learn. Stay silent, or you'll be next. And notice how they keep you divided. In Celia's world, it was race against race, master against slave, neighbors whispering but never uniting. In your world, it's left versus right, rich versus poor, black versus white, neighbor against neighbor. Division is the oldest trick in the book, because when men fight each other, they don't fight the ones holding the strings. Even your distractions are engineered. Bread and circus, endless entertainment, cheap pleasures, shallow victories. Sports to give you battles that mean nothing, news cycles that keep your anger running in circles, social media to scatter your attention like broken glass. And while you fight, scroll, and consume, the real powers move silently, unchallenged, just as they did in Celia's Missouri. Here's the revelation. Systems don't need to chain your body anymore. They've learned to chain your attention, because a man whose attention is stolen will never notice the cage around him, and a man who cannot notice is all red. I conquered. Celia's name was buried so her fire would not spread. But you are hearing it now, and with every second you are being forced to make a choice. Will you be another pawn in their system of distraction and division, or will you be the dangerous anomaly, the man who sees, the man who refuses, the man who remembers? Because once you remember, you cannot return to sleep, and that is exactly what they fear. Every system of power runs on sacrifice. It always has. Look at history closely and you'll see the pattern. The public execution, the scapegoat, the offering of blood to prove that order is still intact. The Romans threw rebels to lions. The medieval church burned heretics at the stake. Missouri hanged Celia. Different costumes, same ritual. Her trial was theater. Her death was the finale. When the judge silenced her testimony, when the jury returned the verdict, when the rope was placed around her neck, every moment was a ritual performance designed not to punish one girl, but to reassure the community. The system is still in control. Do not resist. Do not question. This is what happens to those who disobey. This is how institutions preserve their image. They consume lives to feed their myth of legitimacy. The church protects its name by casting out sinners. The state protects its order by labeling enemies and crushing them. Corporations protect their power by sacrificing workers, discarding lives in the name of profit. Sacrifice is the blood tax every empire demands, not for survival, but for the illusion of permanence. And here is the disturbing truth. You are living in the same ritual cycle. Only now the sacrifices are hidden in plain sight. Young men shipped into wars fought for resources. Protesters silenced under the label of domestic threat. Whistleblowers exiled or buried in prisons while the crimes they expose continue unpunished. Even your own energy is drained daily. Sacrificed to jobs that hollow you out, to systems that feed on your time and attention. You bleed in hours, not in flesh, but it is sacrifice all the same. Celia was 19. She had endured 5 years of violation, 5 years of silence, and in one act of defiance, she exposed the fragility of her master's world. The court could not allow her to live because her existence proved the system was breakable. And so they killed her, not because of her guilt, but because of her symbolism. She became an offering to keep the illusion of white, male, legal authority alive. But here's what they didn't understand. Sacrifice doesn't always kill the fire. Sometimes it fans it. Celia's rope was meant to erase her. Instead, it turned her into a forbidden flame, the kind that still burns, centuries later, in the minds of men willing to see. Celia's hanging was not just a punishment, it was programming. The town gathered, the ropes were tightened, and the execution was staged as a public warning. That's how systems reinforce obedience. not through private justice, but through public fear. Fear spreads faster than fire. Fear makes men police themselves. And here's the truth you need to see. Those cycles of fear never ended. They simply became more sophisticated. Every war you've lived through, every televised attack, every breaking news headline soaked in blood, these are modern rituals of sacrifice. Each one staged to remind the population, without us, chaos will consume you. It's the same message Celia's neighbors were meant to absorb as they watched her body fall. Obey the system, or you will share her fate. The executioner has changed costumes. Sometimes it's the soldier, sometimes it's the police. Sometimes it's the media anchor reading from a teleprompter with calm authority. The ritual is the same. A body is broken, a life destroyed, and the spectacle of suffering is broadcast to feed your fear. And while you tremble, while you cling to the illusion of safety, those who rule grow stronger. Think carefully. Why do you see endless images of violence, chaos, and division, but never the faces of those who profit from it? Why do the cameras show you riots in the streets, but never the boardrooms where decisions are made? Because fear is only effective when it has a visible target. They give you the target. They keep the strings hidden. And every time you accept it, every time you whisper to yourself, "That's just how the world is," you are already sacrificing yourself. Your courage, your will, your clarity. That's the invisible offering the system demands. Men too distracted, too broken, too divided to rise. Celia's execution was supposed to prove resistance was futile. But here's the secret. Resist it.
Tance is never futile. Her fire lives because it was witnessed, because men like you can still hear it. That's why this story survived the ash, the missing records, the deliberate erasures. Because truth has a way of slipping through cracks, haunting the world like smoke that refuses to fade. And now, as you hear this, you stand in the same place as those who watched her hang. You are given a choice. Absorb the lesson of fear and remain silent, or carry the fire forward. Ilia's story feels unique, but it is not. It is one verse in an ancient song, a pattern repeated so often across time that most men stop hearing the rhythm. Every empire, every kingdom, every republic tells itself it is different, modern, enlightened. But scratch the surface, and you'll find the same machinery grinding underneath. The pharaohs of Egypt built pyramids on the backs of slaves, telling their people the gods demanded obedience. The Romans crucified rebels along their roads, turning death into a billboard of power. The medieval lords taxed peasants into starvation, insisting it was divine order. And in 1855, Missouri, they hanged a teenage girl, insisting it was justice. Different names, different costumes, same cycle. That cycle is this. Corruption is eternal, but it always hides itself behind ritual. Those in power never admit they rule by force. They wrap it in symbols. In Celia's time, the symbol was the law. Courts, judges, documents that made human beings into property. Today the symbols are different. Democracy, freedom, security, progress. But the trick is the same. Control dressed in language so sacred that no one dares question it. You see it now, don't you? The same hands that silenced Celia still move in your world. They don't wear powdered wigs or hold whips. They wear suits. They hold microphones. They speak in polished speeches that make cages sound like paradise. And most men nod along, never realizing the words are chains. History isn't a straight line of progress. It's a wheel that grinds down anyone who resists. And Celia's body was one of the spokes on that wheel, broken to keep it turning. But here's the truth. They don't want you to realize. The wheel keeps turning only because people believe in it. Once belief cracks, once enough men refuse, the wheel shatters. That's why her story matters.
That's why they tried to
erase it. Because she exposes the lie at the core of every empire, that their power is eternal. It isn't. It never has been. And now, centuries later, the same fire that burned her master's body is being handed to you. The same choice: accept the cycle or break it. The old chains were iron, heavy, visible, undeniable. Celia felt them in the locked door of her cabin, in the calloused hands of her master, in the silence that followed every night of violation. She knew she was a prisoner because the chains clinked when she moved. But what about you? You look around and see no shackles, no ropes, no overseers with whips. You tell yourself you are free, yet the truth is more dangerous. Your chains are invisible. They are woven into your habits, your routines, your beliefs. You carry them without feeling their weight, and that makes them harder to break. Think about it. You wake when the clock commands you. You labor for wages that barely sustain you. You sign contracts you never wrote, follow laws you never chose, and live under systems you never voted for. You obey algorithms that decide what you see, what you think, what you desire. You don't feel the whip, but you still move at another man's command. That is not freedom. That is slavery perfected. The beauty of invisible chains is that you defend them yourself. You justify them. You say, "This is just life. This is how things are. At least I am safe." Safety is the new plantation. Comfort is the new cabin. Distraction is the new whip. And you kneel, not because someone forces you, but because you have been trained to kneel and call it choice. Celia refused. She stared into the face of the man who claimed to own her and shattered the illusion of his power. She knew what it would cost. She knew the rope awaited her. And still, she chose fire. That is freedom, not safety, not comfort, not permission, but the terrifying courage to say no more. Now, you are faced with the same question. Though your ropes are digital, your master's unseen. Will you continue pretending your cage is a home? Or will you dare to see the bars for what they are? Because once you see them, the fire begins. And once the fire begins, there is no turning back. That's the moment they fear most, not when you fight, but when you finally see. Breaking visible chains is easy. You see them, you hate them, you swing until they shatter. But invisible chains, those are different. They live inside you. They whisper in your head. They tell you to play it safe, to be reasonable, to keep quiet, to obey. And when you finally recognize them for what they are, you will feel something terrifying. Isolation. Because here is the truth. Once you see the system for what it is, you can never unsee it. The illusions that comforted you, gone. The distractions that numbed you, hollow. The conversations most people cling to, meaningless. You begin to feel like a stranger in your own world because you no longer believe the lies that hold it together. That is the real cost of freedom, loneliness. When Celia lifted that club and brought it down on her master's skull, she was utterly alone. No jury would defend her. No community would protect her. She chose truth over safety, fire over silence, and she paid with her life. You may not face the gallows, but you will face exile of another kind. Friends will call you paranoid. Family will tell you you've changed. Society will laugh at you, dismiss you, mock you, because nothing terrifies them more than a man who refuses to kneel. That is why most never dare to see, because once you do, you cannot go back to sleep. But here is the paradox. While the path of truth begins in loneliness, it ends in power. Because the same fire that isolates you will also forge you. You will stop living as a pawn and start living as a man. You will stop existing in silence and begin to carve your voice into the world. That is the transformation the system fears most. Not rebellion in numbers, but awakening in the individual.
because one awakened man is more dangerous than 1,000 asleep. And that is what Celia represents. Not just a slave girl who struck back, but a warning across centuries that
system can be broken, and if one can break it, so can another, and another, and another. The wheel of history spins, but fire has always had the power to stop it.